Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this first event of EV Cincy Week 2020, which is our nod to National Drive Electric Week. The City of Cincinnati Office of Environment and Sustainability created EV Cincy as a platform to grow the awareness of and to educate people about the benefits of electric vehicles in this region. It's a project born out of the city's participation in the American Cities Climate Challenge, which works with 25 cities across the country, helping to accelerate their most impactful climate change initiatives. My name is Carla Walker, and I'm the climate advisor for the City of Cincinnati, helping to implement the American Cities Climate Challenge work here in Cincinnati. One of my priority projects is EV Cincy and helping to build out the electric vehicle charging infrastructure here in Cincinnati. For National Drive Electric Week, EV Cincy wanted to focus on the broad EV ecosystem that includes the important element of charging, how that infrastructure is being developed, where it's being developed, and why. I'm excited about today's event because it's an opportunity to share how other sectors are interacting with EVs and beginning to add to Cincinnati's renaissance as an EV Cincy. The goals of EV Cincy are to add 162 charging sites across the Cincinnati region over 2 years. We are responsible for trying to educate 10,000 residents about EVs and the benefits of EVs and the work that Cincinnati is doing around electric vehicles. The city's EV parking program, which began in 2008, is also a part of our goals. Even though it began in 2008, it was lagging in subscribers, and so we wanted to supercharge this program for the American Cities Climate Challenge, and we're trying to get at least 1,000 applicants into that program. That is for owners of 100% EVs, no hybrids are involved there, and those owners can pick up a free permit from City Hall, which allows them to park free at any of our city-owned parking meters and one of our city garages. And then finally, one of the goals of the city of EV Cincy is to help with the transitioning of our city fleet. In 2018, the city of Cincinnati began to transition its fleet to 100% electric, and we are set to do that by 2035. Our guests today include Kelly Urick from Fourth Mobility and Megan Nauer from the Cincinnati Art Museum. Kelly is the program manager for Fourth. She promotes electric vehicle adoption through utility engagement and supports consumer education at the Go Forth Electric Showcase. She holds a Master's of Environmental Management from Portland State University and brings a passion for sustainability to the Fourth team. Fourth has been a partner with the City of Cincinnati in the American Cities Climate Challenge for the last 2 years and has been instrumental in helping us develop EV Cincy. Megan Nauer is the Marketing and Communications Coordinator at the Cincinnati Art Museum. She has been with the team at the Cincinnati Art Museum since the spring of 2019. She is a member of the museum's Green Team, a cross-departmental group working to bring arts, sustainability, and community care into the same conversation locally. She is dedicated to bringing her background in communications into service of a more sustainable museum and city by advocating for renewable resources at this pivotal time for our planet. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Urick so she can begin her presentation. Kelly, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Carla. And let's see. All right, thank you for control here. All right, let's see if I can. There we are. So as Carla mentioned, my name is Kelly Urick. I'm a program manager at Fourth, and I actually am leading Fourth's work through the American Cities Climate Challenge, just a hop, skip, and a jump away over in Indianapolis. So although I'm based in Portland, Oregon, I'm glad to be joining you all here this afternoon. So Carla gave a brief enough an introduction, but just for those of you that have not heard of Fourth before, as I mentioned, we're based out of Portland, Oregon. We are a nonprofit trade association, and our mission is to advance the adoption of clean, smart, and electric transportation. And we do that through a variety of areas, including industry development, transportation policy, demonstration projects, and then finally accelerating market adoption through increased consumer education and awareness of electric vehicles and electric transportation. So I'm going to be here kind of setting the stage for workplace charging for our conversation today. So just to start us off, workplace charging, oops, let me back up again. Sorry about that. Back us up. Probably went too far. Okay, all right, we'll see. Hopefully you're viewing the why install workplace charging slide. So workplace charging is a really great way for companies and organizations to align their commitment to sustainability with, I don't know why it keeps skipping ahead. That's all right, thank you. With the regional and city greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals. So as Carla already mentioned, workplace charging is very well aligned with city goals through the American Climate Cities Challenge, but also just broader sustainability goals. In addition to that, workplace charging has demonstrated that it is a good way to attract and retain sustainability-minded and high-quality employees as well as customers to your business. Workplace charging is also an incredible way and proven way to increase EV adoption. It motivates employees to purchase EVs for themselves just through greater awareness and access to charging infrastructure. And the Department of Energy recently came out with a study that showed that employees with access to workplace charging are 6 times more likely to drive an electric vehicle. So that's pretty telling for sure. And then finally, workplace charging also provides a great opportunity for fleet electrification. So if your organization is thinking about or already has some electric vehicles in its fleet, you might consider how adding charging stations to support your employees or your customers could also support fleet electrification. Okay. Now let's see if we can go forward. There we go. All right. So in addition to the benefits that workplace charging brings to your organization and to your business, it's also a tremendous value to your employees themselves. So this graphic here just kind of shows the 3 main areas where EV drivers are likely to charge. And at the bottom, of course, you can see a lot of charging is going to happen at home. That's still the most common place where people will be charging up. But for people that don't have access to charging or have longer commutes, being able to charge in public, such as at the workplace, is going to be really crucial. So if you're able to provide that benefit, you're helping to boost range confidence by allowing access to greater than one charging station that someone might have at home. But then also for drivers that maybe have purchased a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, you're increasing the number of electric vehicles that person is able to drive. So let's say that they have a 20-mile commute and their EV has an electric range of 30 miles. Well, if they're able to recoup those 20 miles that they drove in the morning over the course of their workday, then they can drive on electricity back home as well. So that's a win-win for everyone involved. And then also just thinking about employee benefits in general, workplace charging is a very low cost benefit that you can provide to your employees that provides, again, like I said, a larger value than to the employee in the end. Okay, so I want to take just a brief step back and make sure we're all talking in the same language here. When I'm talking about workplace charging, I'm generally going to be talking about what we call level 2 charging, which is going to allow for drivers to regain about 20 to 40 miles of charge per hour that they're plugged in. So if you think about an employee that's parked at your workplace for 8 hours, that's well more than enough time than they would need to recoup their average commuting distance. And so one charging station could actually serve several employees over the course of a day. And then also, I just want to remind us all that electric vehicles can charge up using what we call level 1 charging, which is most simply put a standard wall outlet. So this is an option that can supplement any workplace charging stations that you install to allow for even more people to be able to charge up, even if at a slightly slower rate, as you can see there. What we're not going to be really talking about today are DC fast chargers. These are really only found in public, and some workplaces may choose to install them, but not really the nature of what I'll be talking about today. And then just another kind of helpful tip, if ever I say EVSE, I am just using an acronym that stands for Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment. You can think of that as a charging station. Okay, so let's see here. All right, so some of you may be thinking, well, why are we having this conversation right now? With COVID-19, everyone is working from home. So why is it important that I'm thinking about workplace charging? Well, while it's true that many of us have transitioned and are still working remotely, workplace charging is a lengthy process program to implement. And so I would argue that now is a really great time to be thinking about it because eventually people will be returning to the workplace. And so if you start thinking about putting in infrastructure now, it's possible that by the time they do return, that infrastructure will be in place and you will have avoided possibly disrupting employees with any sort of construction that might happen during that process. Okay, so what does that process look like? Well, it's like I said, it can be a really lengthy process, but I think in all cases, I would encourage you to start with stakeholder outreach. So this includes securing buy-in from leadership or executives at your organization. A lot of times workplace charging programs sort of begin from EV owners and EV drivers themselves, looking and hoping to encourage their employer to install workplace charging. So that's a lot of times how momentum is gained in this process, but it's important for those people to make sure that they're engaging all the stakeholders that could be involved in this process, not just leadership, not just the EV drivers, but also facilities managers, potentially fleet managers. All should be part of that process. And then the next step is called site assessment, and that is where you'll most likely invite an electrician or a contractor to your property to sort of assess your parking facilities, take a look at your electrical infrastructure, and see what's feasible in terms of installing charging stations. This a lot of times will help you, ensure that you're communicating with your facilities managers and really help you nail down where you want to put the charging stations, how many might be on the table in terms of feasibility. But then also I'd encourage you to get in touch with your utility company at this point. A lot of times utilities, not only should they be involved in this process as the provider of ultimate fuel that you'll be giving to your employees, but a lot of times that they might be interested in providing incentives or some sort of programs that can help you offset some of those costs. So once you sort of have an idea of what's possible at your site, then you want to figure out, well, what should we be doing given our employees, given what we know about what's it going to cost. Let's start looking at what charging stations are available out there. There are a lot of different vendors. How do we start to narrow that down? So that's what happens during the planning phase, and I'll touch on that a little bit more, but then also what's really important here is to estimate demand both now and in the future. And you can do that really simply through employee surveys. So getting an idea of how many EV drivers you have now, how many employees you think might purchase an EV in the near future and that you'd want to be able to plan for. But then also, I think maybe more importantly, of all of those people, how many of them might need to or want to leverage charging at the workplace? So all of those questions will be really important for you to consider as you implement a program. So once you've got that figured out and you have a really long-term plan in place for management and maintenance associated with those charging stations, you'll again want to present that to leadership and make sure that everyone's on the same page before moving into the next step, which should be the most straightforward, which is installation. So in this step, you'll of course be purchasing those charging stations, securing a contractor to install them, or perhaps you're going to be using an in-house electrician to do that installation. That's certainly possible. Obtaining permits from the city or your local jurisdiction, and then completing the installation. Sounds exciting, and unfortunately that's not the end though. Certainly once you have the charging stations in the ground, it's going to be important to make sure people are aware. And you could do this through a number of ways, just simply communicating out via email, through through onboarding processes for new employees to make them aware of this benefit and what the procedures are around them. So whether there are rules around how long someone can stay parked at a specific charging station, or what fees you might be implementing along with them. But it could be more on the fun side of things as well. Maybe you host a ride and drive event or a ribbon cutting ceremony, just to reinforce that this is something that your company or business is really excited about and encouraging EV adoption. And then finally, once you have your program in place, it's going to be important to reassess that regularly to make sure that you've got everything, you've got enough chargers now, but also 2 years from now. You'll want to look at that again and see if what you're doing is working. Okay, and see I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit here. This chart here, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but you'll have these slides as part of the recording for the webinar. So come back and take a look, but it's just a good, helpful visual to start to pencil out and understand what kind of costs you might be looking at upfront, what kind of recurring costs you might want to consider, and then finally, what opportunities there may be for recouping some of those costs over time to get at your total investment. And one thing I want to just point out here is that right now there is an alternative fuels data center, alternative fuels tax credit that you might be able to take advantage of that would allow for up to 30% or $30,000 off the cost of installing charging stations. And if you're not a tax-paying entity, that is okay. That tax credit can still be claimed through a third party, such as an EVSE supplier. So definitely keep that in mind as you start to plan. Okay, and then the last slide here is just kind of starting to break down what all the options are when we talk about charging stations. And most simply, I want to just describe the difference between networked and non-networked chargers, because this is probably one of the first decisions you'll need to make when you're thinking about what kind of charging stations to put in. So network chargers are capable of connecting to the internet. They typically are managed or owned, or operated rather, by a third-party private company. They come with a lot of functionality and features, such as enabling payment mechanisms for people. For example, if you are looking to recoup the cost of your charging stations, you'll probably want a mechanism in place to be able to charge for charging. They allow for things called idle fees, which really is a helpful tool to encourage turnover. Like I said, one charging station should be able to serve several employees over the course of a day. So having that functionality built into the charger is going to be really helpful. You can also set up access restrictions so that perhaps you want that charging station to be used by your employees or customers during the day, but then at night you want to open it up to the public, or perhaps you want to restrict that even further to allow for your fleet vehicles only to be able to use the charging stations. So network chargers are going to have a lot of those features built into them. Of course, with that comes a bit of a higher cost. On the flip side, non-network chargers are much simpler in their design and operation. They lack a lot of those functions that I just described. They do have a much lower cost up front. And so if you're thinking about, you know, your budget limited and you still want to be able to do some of those things that I described with that the network chargers provide, you might just want to think about mechanisms that you can put in place internally to allow for encouraging turnover of the cars. You know, maybe you just connect a calendar to your internal calendar system that people sign up for a time to go charge their car, and then they're notified when they need to move it. Just a quick tip, for a charging station at a workplace, you might expect to spend about $400 a year on annual electricity costs. So it's not a lot of money, but it is there. But again, if you compare that to other employee benefits that you offer your employees, I would imagine this is much lower overall than the cost of those benefits. So at the end of the day, I think it's important that you consider why you're doing this and what are the reasons that your organization has for installing workplace charging now, but also consider where that might take you in the future and how you can prepare for that. Okay, and so we're interested in learning more. Fourth has just come out with a workplace charging toolkit, which includes several of the slides I just showed you, but a lot more detail and information. And if you're interested in seeing that, it'll be provided along with the resources from today. But then you can also reach out to me directly if you have any questions, or through Carla. I'm sure she can connect you to our team if needed. And with that, I will turn it over back to Carla to introduce the next panelist.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I really appreciate that. We're going to turn it over to Megan from the Cincinnati Art Museum. Please continue to drop your questions in the chat box, and we will have a Q&A session with Megan and Kelly after Megan's presentation.
Thanks, Carla. So Kelly got us through a lot of the logistics and whys and nuts and bolts of workplace charging. We are at the Cincinnati Art Museum, a public institution, and I think that when I walk us through today, our decision to install electric vehicle chargers, you guys will get some more of the kind of planning and implementation for EV charging in the community. So just a quick introduction to the museum. Our mission at the Cincinnati Art Museum is, through the power of art, we contribute to a more vibrant Cincinnati by inspiring its people and connecting our communities. In terms of the artwork in our building, the Cincinnati Art Museum features an encyclopedic collection of more than 67,000 artworks spanning 6,000 years. And our building is really a local landmark. We're located in Eden Park, in the original building that was constructed in 1886. So with the many additions that have been built on over the years and a storage warehouse, the museum is huge and comprises 297,880 square feet. So we're definitely going to talk today about some of the reasons for and logistics of bringing sustainability and EV charging into such a historic setting. As you might imagine, having gone through a little bit of the logistics of the museum, there are some unique challenges to working in a museum in order to make them function more sustainably. There are a lot of preservation issues that always come first and foremost for the artwork collection. temperature, humidity, light levels, air filtration. These are all things that we have to pay attention to that definitely give us a larger carbon footprint. So increasingly at the museum, we've been looking for ways to begin to slot in sustainability and a more green way forward wherever we can. So oops, let's see, can I control the screen now? Here we go. So a quick timeline, I'm going to share with you kind of a bit about the museum's overall sustainability initiatives over the years and going forward, and zoom back into what you're all most interested in, electric vehicle charging and how that all kind of fits together into our sustainability goals. So at the museum, we do have a green team that formed in the very beginning of 2019. And one of the first things that we did when the green team formed was take an assessment from our staff to see how important sustainability was to our workers overall. And we were super pleased with the results. 92% of our workplace force said that environmental sustainability is important to them, and 71% feel that greater sustainability is part of our civic duty, both personally and as an institution. So what we really heard in the formation of the green team was that people were eager to bring sustainability initiatives into our work at the museum. So some ways here that you can see we began to introduce that were kind of very approachable recycling and waste management trainings. We did a lot of work with our staff around that in 2019, and we're able to get a lot of buy-in internally and begin to think about those sustainability initiatives in terms of our facilities and events across the board, which built on our momentum. In 2020, we joined the 2030 district in Cincinnati, which some of you may be familiar with. If not, just a quick overview to give you an idea of their goals. The 2030 district is a collaborative effort to create a network of sustainable, healthy, and high-performing buildings in Cincinnati. It's organized by the Green Umbrella, which is our region's sustainability alliance. And by joining the 2030 district this year, our museum was really able to signal our commitment to signing on to work toward their goals of a 50% reduction in water usage, energy usage, and transportation emissions by the year 2030. So we were really happy to sign on to that and become a part of working toward that goal. Our first big win in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, which I'll just go over really quickly, was kind of completed late 2019, early 2020. And it had to do with a complete overhaul of our lighting system in the museum to convert everything from fluorescents and halogen lights to LEDs. It was a huge win for us because it showed how we could work across departments at the museum and get buy-in from many different parts of the organization to pull off a big project around all of the logistics that we have to work with on our unique site to bring in a greater level of sustainability. So switching over the enormous number of lights in our museum helps us save a total of over 1.5 million pounds of carbon emissions per year, and helps us save over 1 million kilowatt hours of electricity, as well as thousands of dollars, and a big saving on physical materials. So again, related to the big picture, that gave us an idea of what we could do in our facility when we work together to bring in these kind of modern sustainability techniques. So moving forward, in progress right now in our big picture sustainability, we have a 2030 grant proposal in the works, which is seeking for even more energy reducing and green facilities upgrades. We are continually tracking our utilities and benchmarking and identifying areas for improvement. We have hired a horticulturalist to work on our grounds, which helps us connect our historic site and our operations to greater sustainability. And we are implementing electric vehicle charging installation to promote the use of electric vehicles in Cincinnati. So again, like I said, our first big win in emissions reduction really gave us a taste for success, and we realized that we needed to slot in these sustainability initiatives wherever we could. So earlier in the year, we completed a huge project activating our grounds at the Art Museum. We built the Art Climb steps, which some of you may be familiar with at this point. They connect the corner of Gilbert Avenue and Eden Park Drive with our beautiful site. But quickly we realized that there was going to be an overhaul of the parking lot, which lays in between the top of the Art Climb and the museum. And so the Green Committee knew that we really had to swing for the fences and try and make that as sustainable of a project and an undertaking, and as environmentally friendly of a permanent fixture at our museum as we could, which is what led us to advocate for the EV charging stations. So what currently looks like this, a large hole in the ground in front of our museum, will eventually be our brand new parking lot, which will look something like this. And we were able to quickly work together to accomplish some of the things that Kelly brought up in terms of seeking buy-in from our senior leadership and our facilities managers, and slide that plan for the electric vehicle chargers into the plans for construction. We have partnered with Electrata, which, to use some of the language that Kelly introduced to you guys, is a networked charging station. So they will be the ones supporting our new stations in the parking lot. For us at the museum, these electric vehicle charging stations really represent a commitment to that 2030 goal of a reduction in transportation emissions. And this is our way of being able to help with something that at first glance might not seem like the museum has a direct hand. There are tons of reasons to provide the infrastructure for electric vehicles, but for us, it really aligns with those sustainability goals of our institution, and ties into that notion of greater sustainability being part of our civic duty. So by adopting these EV charging stations, we're really looking at providing everything we can to be an asset to our visitors and our community, and to raise the profile of electric vehicles in our local culture in Cincinnati. So through extensive visitor research, we know our demographics very well. We know that this is a service that is likely to be appreciated among our demographics, and we hope that by getting the ball rolling, we can grow the demand for this in our site into the future. So just a little bit about Electrata. They're a local startup building infrastructure for electric vehicles in Cincinnati. Their model of service fits our needs really well, and their stated goals fit really well with our mission as well. I would just like to share that one of Electrata's mission statements is that they promote equity in clean mobility by powering social service organizations, which really just fits in so nicely with what we do at the museum. So the front parking lot here, I don't know if everyone can see where I'm pointing on the screen, but we have the entrance to the museum, and these kind of diagonally striped parking spaces are our wheelchair accessible spaces. And just along the far side of those is where our electric vehicle charging stations will be going. We're getting 3 charging stations right off the bat in our redesigned parking lot, which means there is a total capacity for 6 vehicles to charge at one time. It's a double-sided charging station pole. Again, this is a networked service, so it is charged. They run through, Electrata works with an app called Flow for their payment. It's all very, very easy. I actually don't personally yet have an electric vehicle, but I downloaded the app and made sure that it was easy and straightforward so that when I tell everyone about it, I'll be able to give them good instructions. Electrata has a great model for maintaining their stations, which also fits our needs. It's kind of hands-off for us in the end, other than promoting. And they have a great model for splitting the profits that the stations generate and helping their partners break equal or make a steady profit. So these will all be all of the electric vehicle charging stations will be level 2 chargers, which get about 25 to 30 miles of driving per charging hour. Kind of our research shows that the average Cincinnati driver drives about 30 miles a day, meaning that a visitor who spends 1 to 2 hours in the museum and is charging while they are there can get a great level of charge to carry them through their day. And that timing matches up well with our standard visitation time. So we'll be working closely with Electrata to monitor our usage trends, and we'll be building questions about electric vehicles and charging into our future visitor research surveys. So we'll be able to get an idea of how the presence of the charging station serves our visitors, but also whether it changes their perception of or intent around electric vehicle usage in our city. So I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Carla and we can do questions for Kelly or me.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Megan, for that presentation. It's really interesting. I wanted to make sure that when we're talking about the EV charging infrastructure here in Cincinnati, there is worksite charging, but I think what you all are doing over at the Art Museum, especially because you are one of the iconic cultural institutions for the city, you're kind of taking a lead on how to integrate EV charging and sustainability into a model that's not necessarily always known for sustainability practices, but it's great that you and the green team are moving forward on that. I wanted to get us started, and I might ask Jennifer if you're able to close out the presentations and bring the speakers on videos. That would be great. Fantastic. I wanted to get us started with just a conversation here with Kelly and Megan around the idea of best practices and lessons learned. And Kelly, it's great that Forth has pulled together the toolkit. So I wonder from your perspective of putting the toolkit together, would you be able to share what you think are, like, at least maybe the top 3 best practices? Like, what should businesses and work sites and employers be thinking of when they are exploring this idea of going into the EV charging infrastructure world, especially for mid-sized companies?
Yeah, that's like an excellent question, Carla. And yeah, I just want to also say, Megan, excellent presentation. I think our two presentations worked really well together, and it's great to hear kind of the experience that you're going through. I think one thing you indicated would probably make my top 3 list, which is part of that. If you remember back to the program roadmap in the stakeholder outreach section of planning, you know, so my best practice there is talk early and often to all stakeholders, particularly your facilities managers, your parking facilities managers, because it's quite possible that there are opportunities for synergy when, for example, your parking lot is getting a refresh, to be able to just slip EV charging in during those times. A lot of times, a company might find that just setting out to install workplace charging can be cost prohibitive. But if you're able to do it when there's other construction being done, the cost savings are tremendous, and it makes for a much easier case for securing that buy-in. The second thing that I would say as a best practice is around the surveys idea. So it's going to be, I think, crucial for a leadership team or the decision makers at your organization to understand that there really is demand for charging stations before they give you the green light to put them in. If they perceive that it's just 1 or 2 EV really energetic EV drivers that just want this for themselves, then they're going to be much less likely to allow you to pursue a program. But if they see that there is demand across the organization, especially if there are opportunities to kind of double up through fleet electrification opportunities, then a survey is going to be able to expose that information, and so it's going to go a long way too in securing that buy-in. And then kind of the third best practice I would say would be around identifying which charging stations you want to install. I think the idea of providing free charging sounds really great. However, I think most EV drivers don't expect that from their workplace. They expect to have to pay for fuel just like they would if they owned a gas car. But also it's going to be really crucial to ensure turnover, because if something is free, people will take advantage of it, and perhaps people that don't need to take advantage of it will take advantage of it and potentially get in the way of those that do need it not being able to access that charging.
Megan, thank you so much for that, Callie. I appreciate that. Megan, I'm curious, would you have some lessons learned for other cultural institutions that are embarking on this journey?
Yeah, I think that Kelly makes a great point. Document everything. We are big on research at the museum, and that really is what matters to our senior leadership in terms of making changes to our facilities. So, Electrata and the Green Team made a case for the rising usage of electric vehicles and how it tied to the demographics that we serve, how it tied into our mission, specifically of community building and kind of modeling practices for the community. So I would say for cultural institutions, it's finding that way to tie to your mission, how this amenity or service ties to your mission and what you want to provide, and then documenting all the ways in which it could and hopefully will potentially be successful, which we'll definitely be monitoring closely as we get into the implementation of the stations.
Excellent. There's a question in the chat box here from Gary, and I want to ask this because this is actually relevant to some of the work that EV Cincy is doing. So he asks, or states, that the population in the greater Cincinnati metro area is over 2 million, but that only a handful of employers provide workplace charging. What is the biggest barrier perceived? What is the biggest barrier? Perceived unfairness to or pushback from ICE driving employees? Is it cost and logistics of installation? Is it demand? Like, is no one really asking for it? And so from both of your perspectives, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Kelly, what is kind of what are the general perceptions there or challenges that other cities have faced? I'd love to see what that looks like from your perspective of working with a number of cities, not just the American climate cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, Gary, or set of questions. Thank you. I would say, so I'll just kind of back up and say that Forth was involved several years ago with the U.S. Department of Energy's Workplace Charging Challenge, which was a nationwide effort to encourage more charging station installation at workplaces. And so we certainly have a lot of lessons learned from conversations that we had with many large and medium-sized businesses during that challenge. And the two biggest things we took away from that were cost. So just it's not even a perceived cost, it's the hard cost of putting in infrastructure is probably the biggest barrier. But the second biggest barrier that we found was just, like most things in the EV space, is lack of understanding and awareness. And that's actually one of the reasons why we tried to create this toolkit that could help employers kind of, no matter where they are in their journey, see what a successful program implementation could look like, and connecting them with resources on how to get there. So a lot of, efforts that we have come across have sort of stopped because they realized that the cost was too high, or that they just didn't know who to call for support, and it got hard. And when things get hard, sometimes we're more apt to give up on them. So I would say those are the two biggest ones. In terms of this sort of tension with gas driving vehicles, I have seen concerns or hesitancy, I guess, from public organizations, perhaps like, cities, for example, or just other publicly owned institutions that are hesitant to provide free workplace charging, but even workplace charging at all, because it is perceived as being a benefit that's only for a certain subset of public staff. And so that is certainly a barrier, but I wouldn't say it is the biggest barrier, especially when you can align your company or organization's mission with the greater adoption of electric vehicles and lowering greenhouse gas emissions.
I can share with you too, this is one of the reasons why EV Cincy was born. A lot of the work that we do and that we're focused on is trying to develop a more consciously aware and actively aware public around EVs and the benefits of EVs and all of the different elements of EVs. A lot of the work that we've done through some of the EV Cincy video events have really focused on cars and the mobility of it, but we've not, I think we only had 1 or 2 sessions where we've really dove into EV charging. And really trying to be more sector specific around the questions of and the challenges that businesses, small businesses, and in particular our cultural and arts community, what they might be dealing with, since every work site is going to be, and every sector is going to be very different. Megan, I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspectives of if there has been any pushback from the work that you all did in the Art Museum. I think it's wonderful that you all created a green team. It'd be nice to hear a little bit about if there were challenges, how the green team has worked around that.
Sure. Well, you know, partly to address the question of barriers to EV chargers in particular, I will say that cost in this project and others that the green team has taken on is always a barrier for us. We are an arts nonprofit. So, you know, cost is important, and it's something that we always have to line up to make sense. We rarely receive pushback other than that on our sustainability initiatives. The museum is always interested, but we have to make it make financial sense as well. And in looking at providing an amenity for our visitors, like the charging, we just had to look at the ways that we could come out neutral or on top with that. And that's really where partnering with the third party made sense for us and helped us get around prohibitive costs of installation and maintenance. So, you know, it's looking for solutions like that, ways that maybe you can engage with someone else locally to help defray cost or work through any other barrier that you might encounter, I would say.
And just ballpark, Kelly, if I hadn't heard it already, what charging infrastructure costs, what do those look like? I mean, are we looking at, for one dual port, is that could range from 10 to 15 or 20,000? What are we looking at, just to give people a general ballpark of what they should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. It certainly depends because, you know, every charging manufacturer, networked or not, are going to have their own set of benefits that come with the price that you pay. But I would say, and one thing that we have in the toolkit that everyone can take a look at in the appendix, we list out, I think, about 15 different suppliers and kind of the benefits that go along with those. And I think we ended up taking the prices out because a lot of times if you buy in bulk, you can get a better discount. But to give the most ballpark estimate that I can, you know, at the lower end for just the charging station itself, you can probably find them around $1,500 to $3,000. At the higher end, you're probably looking closer to $10,000 just for the units, with those networking fees and things like that already built into that price. And then the installation is also very wide ranging. It's very site specific. But a good kind of rule of thumb is about $10,000 per unit for that installation as well.
And just for those who may not have heard, you had mentioned that there were some incentives potentially for work sites. Could you repeat those again?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and actually, so there is a tax credit through the Alternative Fuels Data Center, which is a federal government entity, and it's an alternative fuels infrastructure tax credit. And actually, it's not just for businesses. I only mentioned it for businesses, but individuals can claim it themselves. So if you install a charging station at your home, you can get up to $1,000 off of that if you apply for the tax credit. But for businesses, it is up to 30% of the total cost of the installation, or $30,000, whichever comes first.
So it can make things a little more reasonable.
Yeah, and a lot of times utilities, and didn't do my research before to see if the utilities in your area have any current incentives, but I would encourage you to at least communicate with them because it's possible that there are additional savings available there.
Excellent. Excellent. We are at time, and so I want to thank our presenters for being with us today, both Kelly from Fourth and Megan from the Cincinnati Art Museum. You guys, this was a great conversation and presentation about how businesses, work sites, cultural institutions, and arts groups can add to the EV charging infrastructure and be a part of developing this EV readiness here in Cincinnati. I would encourage the audience to check out the EV Cincy website, which is on the Office of Environment and Sustainability's webpage for the City of Cincinnati. There you can find out a lot more about EV Cincy, as well as the other activities and events that are happening this week for EV Cincy Week. Megan mentioned Electrata. Electrata is actually going to be presenting tomorrow for our event. It's our monthly E-Vroom Zoom, and they'll be talking a lot about some of the other cultural and iconic institutions that they are working with to build out EV charging in Cincinnati. You can join us on Wednesday, and we'll talk a little bit with the folks from Cincy Red Bike and the Garage OTR and talk about the e-bike revolution that's happening here in Cincinnati. And on Thursday, we'll speak with our fleet director, Ruth Allison from the City of Cincinnati, to talk about where we are with Cincinnati's transition to 100% electric on our fleet. And then join us for a live event on Friday with Electrata again as we all come together, socially distanced, of course, and celebrate one of their most recent projects that hit the ground. Thank you all for a wonderful presentation. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great Monday. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.